3 words: real-time compositor in Blender. We all know that Blender has seen some crazy cool improvements in the last years, like first of all Eevee, and then the cycles improvements, then geometry nodes, and now they are working on the new hair system. If you haven't seen that yet, check out some videos on YouTube. It's amazing. And one thing that was always really bad, really slow, was the compositor. But somebody's actually improving it, and they're making it real time, and we can play with it right now. So that's what we're gonna do in this tutorial right after the intro. Okay, so this whole thing is still extremely experimental, but it's already usable and we can already play with it. So first of all, we have to download an experimental build. And the easiest way to do that is using Blender Launcher. If you don't have Blender Launcher, get Blender Launcher. And you just go down to the experimental, and then in the downloads list here, you will find something that is called Temp Viewport Compositor something, okay? It's in this list. You click download and then it appears in the library once it's downloaded and installed on your system. I already have it. I already have one running, and it is this one. So this is that experimental build with the real-time compositor built into it. How do we actually use it? Well, first of all, we have to go to the preferences, and then in interface, you enable the developer extras, which makes this button down here appear, right? And in here, you enable real-time compositor. It's as easy as that. And once you have that, you can go either in the material view or in the rendered view. Let's just go to rendered view. You can drop down here and say use compositor. So now your viewport in Blender is actually using the compositor node tree to create the final image that you see on your screen. Let's test this. I'm gonna open a compositor down here, use nodes. So this is the compositor that you always use, like in the compositing tab over here. Okay. And now let's add Shift A, let's put in a blur node, relative on the x-axis, real-time compositor in the viewport. I mean, how crazy is this? Of course, it also works in cycles. So now I'm rendering, let's mute this. So this is now rendering in cycles in the viewport. It's so fast that we can't even see that it is actually cycles, and blur works. Blur on the Y, blur on the X, and you can see the speed is amazing. Like if you've ever worked with the compositor, you know how slow it is, right? So now this is real time in the compositor, and this is how you get started with it. Now, not all nodes of the compositor are implemented yet, and it is still a bit buggy, but let's see what we can do with it and play with it a little. So I am going to open my startup file that you might be familiar with. This is a free download for all patrons over at patreon.com/chrisp. And you know, you've probably seen this before in other tutorials. This is my startup file. We can go to the cycles render, because that's the default that I have set here. And this is my scene with that background and that shader ball and all of that. So let's switch over to the compositor. And you can see this is my default compositor node tree of that startup file. I've explained this before in a different video. I went through all of these nodes and what they do, because there are some custom groups in here to create different effects. Now let's see if the real-time compositor works. So in here, use compositor, and you can see it's not doing anything. And that is because there are some nodes in here that are not implemented yet. And as soon as you have one of those nodes in your node tree, the whole real-time compositor just stops working. So in order to get this to work, I'm just gonna delete all of this and these reroute nodes. So now you can see it is in fact working because I'm playing in the compositor here and my viewport just went black. So if I connect my image back to my output, I hope you can see this and it's not too small in the recording. So now we have the image. Now let's see what we can do with it. Does the blur still work? Let's try it. Blur relative on the X. Yes, it does. Does it work? It even works when you're not looking through the camera. I mean, this is mind-blowing. This is pretty amazing. Okay, let's remove that node. Now let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can get a lens flare kind of thing, like an anamorphic lens flare. The way we would usually do that is we go to filter, glare. You know, I'm just gonna leave that blur node in here just to see. Oh, you can already see. Okay, this glare node, as soon as it's in the node tree, the blur isn't working. So let's get rid of the glare and the blur is back. Okay. So let's see if we can create our own lens flare effect. Well, how can we get, we need to find the brighter spots. So we can do a math node, plug that in here, set it to greater than, and then turn this up until we just have the brightest spots left. Okay, so this is cool. Now we need, actually we need the blur node. Because we need to blur this maybe relative on the X just to get this sort of effect. I hope you can see it. Then let's take another math node, set it to multiply this by some value, I don't know, 15, to make it really bright. And then all we need to do is add this back onto our original image. So we take a color mix node, set it to where is it? Add, and we take our original image. This would be the lens flare, and we add that to our image. Now look at this, anamorphic lens flares in real time in the viewport. Okay, they're white. Maybe we should make them blue or something to make it look cooler. So shift a color balance. Can we make them blue? What if we take this and turn it to blue? Oh, this is the whole image. We don't want that. Let's disconnect this. Let's connect this and make just the lens flare blue, right? Just the lens flare. Okay, so it turns blue here where it gets darker, and in the middle here, the white is probably okay. Could make it a little brighter. So this would be the dark parts, the mid-range, and then the bright parts. Or if you go to offset power slope, you have to go the opposite way. So if you want to turn it blue, the midtones, then you have to go to orange. So let's turn this to blue. Maybe we blur this out even further. Well, you get the point. That would be the lens flare. And if we don't want, we can set the threshold here. If we don't want lens flares all over, we just want the brightest parts, we can use our greater than. Okay, now we have a lens flare. Now let's try putting the lens flare into its own group here in the node editor. So these 4 nodes, Control G, and you can see our real-time preview has stopped working. So as soon as there's a group in the node tree, it's not working yet. Of course, this is still super heavily under development, obviously. And that's why we're doing this. We're trying and playing with it, right? So let's ungroup this, because then we're back to here. Now, one thing you can see here, when I move the camera around, or my viewport around actually, you can see we're getting a lot of flickering lens flares. And as soon as I let go, we're actually just getting that one that we really want, of the brightest part there. And I figured out that this is a thing about the denoiser. The denoiser in the viewport here is set to start denoising at 3 samples. If I turn that down to 0, so that it denoises even after the first light rays have been rendered in cycles, then you can see that flickering stops. We're only actually getting the bright parts. If we switch the denoiser off, you can see this is like the default behavior. In the beginning, when there's just a few samples rendered, they all have the lens flare on them. But with the denoiser, this looks actually really cool. We can look around, look through the camera. Real-time anamorphic lens flare made with the Compositor. This is crazy stuff. Now let's see if we can get like a blur. What is it called? Fog glow or something. We know we can't use the glare node, because as soon as I get that, it stops working because it's not implemented yet. Oh, by the way, if you want to know which nodes are already implemented, you can go to this website, developer.blender.org/T99210, which is the number of this real-time Compositor task. And here you have the list of the nodes with the checkboxes, all the nodes that are supported. In here it even says the blur isn't supported yet, but it obviously is. Okay, back in Blender, let's make some fog glow. Again, we're just gonna need this probably the whole thing again. We can't group it. Well, doesn't matter. Oops. We need those 4. Shift D, bring them up here. Let's make a fog glow up here. So again, we take our input image and let me just plug that into my Compositor output. The preview node, by the way, Control Shift left click gives you the preview with the node wrangler. Doesn't work in the viewport here. Only the composite output is shown up here. Okay, so this would be that again, which is the same thing. Actually, we could reuse that node. We don't need this one. We're gonna reuse that one. Plug that in here. Plug that into the Compositor. Okay, for the fog glow thing, we're just gonna go 15 in both directions. And this is probably not even showing up in the render. It's just a little tiny thing here. But again, we have to multiply it with something to make it brighter. Multiply by maybe not that bright. Also, a relative is probably not good in this case. So let's do something like this. Okay, and then we're gonna color balance those, or let's just add those on top here. So this would be the image. This would be the fog glow now. Add that, and then we have the fog glow up here. Maybe we want to color this differently. Oh, this is interesting. If you go all the way on the wheel here, it turns into this psychedelic kind of thing. Oh, awesome. Okay, let's make it red, orange, whatever. Just so we can see that it's actually working. So now we have those red little fog glows. Okay, cool. Well, what else can we do? Let's see if we can add a vignette. Vignette is always nice, right? So in order to see the vignette, I'm just gonna click on my backdrop and change this from cutting board to graph paper. This is all part of my startup file, patreon.com/crispy. So let's create a vignette. For the vignette, we're gonna need an ellipse mask. Does that work? Well, seems to work. It's in here now. And we need to blur the ellipse masks. Let's see that. So we need another blur node. Blur relative, probably. Blur a whole lot, and then make this wider and this taller. I mean, the performance of this alone is so much better than in the Compositor. If you want to do this in the Compositor, it always takes seconds to render. And here I'm just doing this in real life, changing the width of my ellipse and changing the X blur and the Y blur. This is crazy. So now let's add, no, we don't add, we multiply. Where is multiply? Here. We multiply that on top of our image. And then we have bokeh. I mean, vignette. Okay, so now let's see, let's make it wider. The blur is quite high, right? 10. I mean, this is real time. This is crazy cool. Okay, let's blur this a little more. Let's blur that a little more. This isn't the best looking vignette, but you can see that it's working. I mean, this is awesome. And to multiply here, we can take it back a little. We have a real-time vignette. I mean, even here, it works. When you're not in the camera view, it's like it takes the viewport for the input dimensions, I guess. Because you can see here, we're getting the vignette here now. And when we look through the camera, we get the vignette based on the camera. This is nice. Or is this based also on the viewport? Oh, it seems to be also based on the viewport. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm sure this is all still about to change, but this is not what this video is about. This video is about to show you that this is actually possible, and we're getting all the node-based composition effects that you can think of in real time in your 3D viewport. I mean, is it just me, or is this just... This is amazing. Okay, what else? Well, the vignette is usually the last effect, right? So let's put this at the end here. I know I've seen before in the list that the distortion, the lens distortion node even works here in real time. So let me make this bigger so that you can see it. Dispersion, I'm turning up the I mean, if you do this in the Compositor and you change the dispersion, it takes like 4 seconds to re-render. And this is real time, people. I mean, this is nuts. What the hell? This is completely mind-blowing. I love it. Okay, so this is going to be interesting to see how they're gonna match what you see here in the viewport to the actual Compositor. Now this is my Compositor node tree. Now let's actually hit render and see what the Compositor does. F12, and we're rendering. Okay, the render is done and it looks very similar. Like the lens distortion looks really good. We have the fog glow here. It's a bit smaller, I guess. But, I mean, it's working. This is the same node tree, right? Same node tree is rendering the real-time viewport, and it's rendering the final Compositor thing. But one thing to note is, first of all, obviously, the way that this is mapped to this viewport here for the vignette that you can see is obviously different here. So here, I mean, this is like completely black here, and out here it's more like here. And also, this is important, this Compositor here, the final Compositor that is used for your final render, is still the old Compositor. It's not using that new system yet, but it will be. This is the goal, that the Compositor, you can read that here, feature applies Compositor in the viewport. In the long term, the real-time Compositor will be unified with the existing Compositor, effectively accelerating the existing composition workflow as well. This is awesome. This is like Photoshop, node-based Photoshop in an open source tool. Crazy cool stuff. Big shout out and thank you to the developers of the real-time Compositor. Keep up the great work. This is going to be a game changer for Blender. I hope you liked this first look at the real-time compositor in Blender. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Chris P. out.